Good evening. It's Saturday night prior to worship and another week of amazing speed, which is hard to believe. I find it hard to all of a sudden realize that it's the end of the week again, and when it seems the week just started. But that's where time is these days, I guess. But this evening, as we gather together, getting ready, thinking of the text from last week and this week, which is actually two pieces of one whole again, held together, but also thinking about life as a Christian and as a disciple, and what life needs to be as a Christian and a disciple. In the midst of especially COVID, but anything else, I think of back when I was in football in high school and college. I was thinking about that earlier today. That when I was in a football game or in a wrestling match, but even more so in a football game, because you get hit from every possible direction, and they're not little love taps; they're pretty good shots. That for the most part you don't even realize that they're happening. It's not just the padding that you have on, but the fact is that you get hit by people and things in the game, and you don't feel it because your body has become so strengthened and so prepared and so enduring. There might be some bruises. Kind of after a game, you might be comparing what we used to call comparing stick marks, because like, oh, look at that one, that's going to be a great bruise or whatever else, and kind of comparing who had the tougher game, but you might not remember where any of those things came from that are now bearing on you. And as I was thinking about that this morning, and as I was working out in the garden a bit and preparing for tomorrow, and everything that's going on, I was reminded about the devotion when I was looking at Hebrews 12, verses 12 and 13. And actually, I kind of want to look at Hebrews chapter 12 really quickly as a kind of a bigger chunk that talks about, it's a well-known text about the fact that therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, almost like a group of people cheering us on and encouraging us on, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. I think right now everybody's eyes are focused somewhere else. Honestly, and again, I think the church's eyes, especially in America, have been focused somewhere else for a long time. We're focusing on all the different lights and attractions and things and possibilities. And again, not that God does not want us to enjoy life or be a part of life, but I think we've gotten kind of heavy-handed with it, to the fact that we just honestly, we don't even realize how off track we've gotten in it, because we're not running the race. The people of Christ aren't running the race, because if the people of Christ were running the race, the world would be having a different response than it is today. We stand back in horror, and we look at the things that are happening in many cases. But if the Church of Christ was standing where it's supposed to be, prepared and in a race, it would be acting and responding very differently to those things. And so, the writer of Hebrews reminds us that we fix our eyes on Jesus, who's the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith, because the joy that was set before him was the cross. And not counting it shame, he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, because he knew that the cross was going to be the thing that was going to get him prepared for the big game that would then end up in a victory and a celebration. And so in the midst of continuing on in the Hebrews writing, then going down in that same chapter, when you get to verses 12 and 13, the writer writes, therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Talking about being prepared, building endurance, building strength, building ability to be prepared for the race and running the race, straightening out our paths, instead of picking all the easy ways to go, choosing the hard routes from day to day in the practice, so that when the race comes, we are ready to go and ready to run it fully. And so I think about Paul so often, as I think of people today, and how I think people just don't understand Paul. I don't think they understand what Paul looks like. I don't think they understand what Paul was really doing, other than to say, "Ooh, that's Paul. We can't do that." And I find that very unfortunate, because ultimately what Paul says in basically everything is, do what I'm doing because you can, because you've got the same power in you that I have in me from Jesus Christ. But Paul often refers to a life of faith as running a race. Matter of fact, in the book of 1 Corinthians in the ninth chapter, starting at verse 24, he says, "Don't you know that everyone in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize?" So running away is to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I don't run like someone running aimlessly. I don't fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Paul's talking about realizing that this race is not over. And we talk so often in the Lutheran Church of understanding that the race has been won, the race is given. But do you hear, when you pay attention to Paul, that he tells us that we should run in such a way as to get the prize, which means you can also not get the prize. I want to make sure you hear that in the midst of this difficult time. Everybody's running. Everybody's running in lots of directions. But are we running to get the prize so that we can get the prize? And everyone who's in that competition goes into strict training, not half-hearted training. Strict training. Now, I know lots of people who've got kids in sports, or they themselves are athletes, and I know preparing for Tanzania and getting started again as I'm trying to get going, the strict training has to happen there. And those are all good and valuable things. They're all good within God's limitations. But the truth is, why don't we do it with our life of faith? Why do we allow our life of faith to be let to get flabby and sad, our arms to become feebles and our knees to become weak? Why do we let our faith, why do we talk ourselves into the fact that we're not so bad in our faith? It's because we use the word faith that is a verb and we turn it into a noun. Because we think we've attained something, which we have been given something and offered something amazingly great and wonderful. And yet we've turned it into something else. We've let it kind of move into a different category for our life and to shuffle it to the back. Because I think we forgot what race we're really meant to run. We're running lots of races these days. People are running in every direction. Frustrations and struggles and heartaches and, you name it, everybody's got something going on besides COVID and everything else, the politics, the racial issues, the challenges of life, deaths of family members, you name it, everyone has got things going on. But you see, getting bounced around and beaten in this game of life, if our bodies were, and basically our spiritual bodies were toughened through endurance and through training and through discipline, we wouldn't notice those things. We wouldn't feel them in the same way. We would respond differently in a life of faith because our bodies had become hardened. Our spirits would become hardened to the things of the world in a way not to turn our backs on them, but that they would not leave a mark on us. That's Christian faith. To be standing around at the end of the race, at the end of the competition, and comparing stick marks. Oh, you remember when that happened? Yep. And look what Jesus did. Took it all away. Look what Jesus did. You see, it's realizing that this life has suffering in it. It's going to have suffering. In fact, we're told it's going to have suffering. We're challenged to realize we're having suffering. And I challenge anybody who wants to say that life shouldn't have any suffering in it to come and read the Bible with me. I'll take you through the whole walk. I won't get you the nice comfy places, because the truth is that's why Jesus came. If it was so cozy and easy, or if Jesus had fixed it in such a way that everything was done, then why do we need Jesus? But the fact he came and he showed us a way. He came to show us a way. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, and it's not only through him in his own direct work and service and giving of himself, crucifixion, resurrection, and everything else, but it's in us then committing our lives to a life like Christ, that faces the bumps and the bruises and the sticks and the challenges and even the broken bones of life, and looks at them in a different way. Because our spiritual bodies are hardened. They've been disciplined. They've been prepared for the race. They know those things are coming, and they're not going to let them stop us from running the race faithfully so that we might attain the gift that God's offering us. And that's another piece right there. Might attain. It strikes me, because when I read the Greek and I look at Paul's writings, he said those words there in Corinthians. He said, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I've preached, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. Calling myself a Christian, but then not working to be a Christian. Wanting the church to serve us instead of serving the church. Realizing all the challenges of life could be swapped and changed if we ourselves would just become actively involved in the work and the worship and the service and the giving and the sharing of the church, which not only would strengthen us, but also strengthen all those around us and harden our bodies for these days and what's coming. And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. The book of Philippians is also more writing that describes the same kind of things from Paul. It's a well-known passage from chapter 3, verse 7 on, where he says, whatever I thought was a gain to me, I now consider loss because of Jesus Christ. What's more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing greatness of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, and that I may gain Christ and be found in him, in Christ, and the righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to be able to attain to the resurrection of the dead. Not that I've already obtained all this or arrived at my goal, but pressing on to take hold of what Christ has taken hold of me for. Do you hear the words of promise in the midst of the words of the challenge of the life we live? First off, we got to ask the question, what are we counting as gains when they're all losses around us, because not one of them is helping us in this time of COVID and other struggle? Matter of fact, what things have we picked up and souped up because we think somehow it makes it better because of COVID or anything else? I love it when I'm talking to people who say, what this has done for me is, honestly, I'm spending more time in the Bible, and I'm starting to see responses from them in their lives of faith. Not that I've already obtained it, because I'm never done. The game's never over until the last shot has been put in. And that's the one where the world gets to think that it's made the best of blows. That ultimate stick that you can hear at the top of the stadium when the pads and the bodies collide, when life thinks it's got its way with you. And because of all the different training and discipline and hardening and blows you've beaten upon yourself and the world has beaten, that has strengthened you through Christ, when life throws that ultimate final blow, it doesn't leave a mark for those who know Christ Jesus. Know him. Not think they know him, know him. not think that they can somehow convince somebody they know him, but still don't live the life of discipline of an athlete. It's really hard to think that a person would be an athlete, an Olympic swimmer or any other competitor, when every night they're out guzzling gallons of beer or eating pounds of pizza, smoking, drinking, doing whatever. And then they get up and say, I'm an Olympic athlete. I'm going to win the gold medal. But it's a fleeting medal, isn't it? It's a medal that Paul reminds us is a thing that only lasts for a moment. I want us to run a race that lasts forever, to achieve the crown of glory that has been won by Jesus Christ when he wore a crown of thorns on his head so he could put a diadem of gold as an inheritor of the kingdom on yours and mine when we reach the final end. The truth is, faith is a challenge and life is a challenge, but faith's challenge faces life's challenge differently. And it calls us to not stand or sit or be with the world, but to be hardening ourselves. The reason why Paul seems so impressive to some people is because they think he's just amazing, but he even said it as he wrote these things. He said it already in the 2 texts I've read you, that you could do it too. You can have it too. Forget what's behind. Start today. Move forward. Trust God. But don't just trust him at a distance. Trust him in every day of practice and discipline, in the word, and in prayer, and in worship, and in giving, and in service and invitation of others. Help make the path level for your own feet so that the race becomes easier because Christ is running with you. I want to remind you that as we have moved forward, we are now over 100 people counting on our worship services. So if you have not called in and reserved a place for worship, we're literally putting people now on a waiting list. You can come and wait and see if others don't come, and then we could shift people in. But it's going to be different again. It's going to take a couple weeks. And if things continue to grow with more desire for having a second worship, we'll set that up and we'll adjust the times accordingly. But also I want to let you know, for those of you who are going to see this before tomorrow, that again, things are going to be different. We're trying to find a good way to do the seating so that it makes everybody fit and it makes everything work, and so that the ushers don't have to stress, and so I don't lose my attention. So I've spent today writing a seating chart. And no, I didn't put you where you think you want to go. I tried to start to put people to match the pews, and by next week when Nikki gives me a list, I'm just going to start at the top and just start filling spots because it'll work out easier that way. Because again, we have to seat you from the front to the back to make it work. But hopefully you'll know exactly what pew you're going to. The ushers will take you to your pew. You can take any one of the positions because you're meant to be in that pew. And then worship will go, and we'll run the race together. I continue to thank you for your patience and your endurance. I continue to pray that you're disciplining yourselves, putting blows upon your body in God's word and his spirit and his will and his way, that you're not allowing yourself to become lazy in this time, but realizing the desire that's within you is calling you to come and be with God's people. And with God's people, then to add a new excitement and a joy. And then when that joy and excitement grows, then to begin to serve, as we serve to change the world around us, to reach into our communities, to make a difference in the world. Cheered on by the witnesses who have gone before, who understand it because they themselves have done it, and they've seen the power of what God can do when people run the race with Jesus. Good night, and God's blessings. I look forward to seeing you and being seen tomorrow. Goodbye.